Welcome, everyone, to our third episode in this series, Understanding People, brought to you by getAbstract. I'm Kirsten Müller-Daubermann, and I'm your host. Throughout this series, we are looking at all different types of interpersonal communication, exploring why we misunderstand each other, and bringing in authors and experts to help us learn how to connect with each other better. In this episode today, we'll learn about the role that implicit bias plays in shaping our views of ourselves, of others, and our world. Our guest is Dr. Barbara Adams. She is the author of Women, Minorities, and Other Extraordinary People, and is the founder and chief learning officer at GAR Diversity Consulting in San Francisco, which stands for Gender, Age, and Race. She holds a doctorate of psychology and organizational development, and she is a former director in the National Diversity and Inclusion Office at Kaiser Permanente. So welcome, Dr. Adams, to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here with you.
Have you. Yeah, it's great to have you. You are the expert. You've literally written the book on the role that implicit bias plays in our lives and our workplaces. But just starting off at first base, what is implicit bias? And I'm curious, since you started your work in this area, have you seen awareness of the role that implicit bias plays grow?
So implicit biases are biases that happen outside of our conscious awareness. They are snap decisions that our brains make to try to help us to categorize information and people and situations. They're influenced by our background, by our cultures, and by all sorts of external factors, our values and our norms. And they drive our behavior. We know that there is this significant amount of data that's been culled and that shows that there are statistically significant links between what our hidden biases are, and sometimes they're called hidden assumptions or implicit assumptions, and the way we act in everyday life. In terms of have I seen an explosion of information about this, it's been incredible. And really, for someone like me who's worked in the field for a number of years, it's very rewarding. I hear it on TV talk shows. It's written about in books on a regular basis. I've even heard, politicians bring up the topic. So I think that it's really a huge plus that we have come this far, that we're able to heighten our awareness that such a thing actually exists and influences all of us.
Yeah. And what role, I know you just mentioned it very briefly, but how does it work in the brain? In your book and in your work, you talk a lot about how the brain works. It's absolutely fascinating. I encourage everyone to read more about it and read the book. But how exactly does it work? And I guess the question initially, when I started exploring this, I felt like, oh goodness, are these views then so entrenched that they can't change?
Right. So neuroscientists have conducted experiments, and they've put people into MRI scanners and showed them photos of people who look like them, people who don't look like them. They vary it by age, they vary it by race, by skin color, and we know that there are certain parts of the brain that light up. One area called the fusiform facial area, and that we are hardwired to really prefer people who look like us, who sound like us, who act like us. And that's really just an evolutionary thing based on the safety of tribes. Our brains process a tremendous amount of stimuli all the time, right? So much so that we have to have automatic processes to be able to make decisions, or we would just drown in all that information. And for the most time, we do a good job using logic and using rational, linear thinking to make clear decisions. Trouble is, when it comes to people, our brains don't really work that way. What they do is they segregate us into people who are like me or not like me. And that's where we run into challenges, because it puts us in a position of having to heighten our own awareness of what's happening in the world if we really want to expand our circle and learn from others, and especially from others who are not like us.
Yeah. And the question is, these situations, these conversations can be really, really difficult because they force people to look inside of themselves and say, okay, where are my biases playing out in ways that I don't even know? Because they do become so automatic. And you give a lot of case studies in your book and talking about how companies have dealt with this and positive change has happened. But those initial explorations can be really uncomfortable. And I would love to get your take on, especially when looking at everything that's happening in the world, and there's so much instability because of the pandemic, as well as political things that are happening. It can feel pretty hopeless. Like, are these views so deep? Are they so subconscious and so automatic? If there is so much awareness, shouldn't we be getting better at exploring our biases and overcoming them? Are they too entrenched? Are our brains too hardwired to change, or is there hope? Give us hope.
There's a great deal of hope. We know also that the neuroplasticity of our brains expands and grows over time. So we used to think that we became less able to grow and learn new things, that our brain cells died off. In fact, what we have learned is that our capacity just continues on and on. So there's plenty of reason, biologically and based in neuroscience, but there's also plenty of reason, I think, sociologically as well. It makes sense, right, that in a business organization, companies are going to do better if they have the input of people who come from different backgrounds and different life experiences. I mean, you're going to innovate much quicker and in a much more robust way if you have these different inputs than if you have the inputs of, a group of 5 white guys who all graduated from Ivy League colleges. So we have come to embrace that. The challenge that we face is that it does require, as you said, leaning into a certain amount of discomfort. So when I work with recruiters and they say, I had an interview with this woman and, she was wonderful and I really liked her and she could do the job, but I just wasn't really comfortable with her. I mean, we didn't have anything really in common. We grew up in very different areas and didn't, she was in a tier 1 school and I was in a different school, and it was just really hard. My guidance is lean into that discomfort and see it as a positive sign that there's something here that you can really learn from that person, and there's something here that the company would benefit by having that individual on board. So as opposed to saying, a lot of times I've heard some of the tech bros say, it's all about, can I have a beer with them after work, but I feel comfortable. Well, that's a lousy criteria. That's not about skill set. It's not about being able to do the job. It's not about a contribution to the organization. So, let's lean into that discomfort to find ways so that we can better embrace all the differences that are out there. I think that the only people who, for whom the biases are so entrenched they can't get past are people who are unwilling to look within. If you're not a reader, if you're not someone who's interested in growth, if you're like so hard pressed into your own norms and value systems as being the way, then you're going to have significant challenges. But I'm happy to say that in the thousands of people that I've worked with, those are few and far between. Most people really want to do better and are intrigued. And I think that it's hard because there's this sense of, if I explore my biases and if I take an implicit association test, which is open to anyone. So anybody who wanted to say, I want to explore my biases, I think I treat other people, the same way as I treat myself, and that I'm fair and, equal in all settings. And so I go to, I think it's implicit.harvard.edu. And I go online and I learned that, oh my God, I have a hidden preference that prefers white people over Black. That makes me a racist. That's a horrible thing. And what we're trying to reconcile is that we all have these. So even many Black people who take the implicit association test find that they have a preference for white over Black. Part of that is just the messages that we get from our society. So looking at those things and being able to say, you know what, yes, you can have some racist tendencies and still be a nice person. You can have some sexist tendencies and still be a nice person. It's really about taking the shame away from learning about what really makes us tick so that we can do better.
Oh, that's so good. I'm so glad that you mentioned that because it's one of my favorite things that you say in the book because of this fear and sometimes discomfort. But it's more important now, I think we can both and all agree, than ever to do this hard work. But exploring your biases and acknowledging that they exist doesn't make you a bad person per se. It
That's
doesn't
right.
mean that you're, yeah. So I love that you said that. You have some great anecdotes in the book where you talk about some steps that you took to overcome some of those biases that you found yourself. Do you mind sharing one or two of those?
Sure. So when I took that first IAT, I then decided that I needed to put myself, I needed to, walk the talk, put myself in a situation of some discomfort. So I got an invitation to attend the Black Enterprise Technology Conference in the San Francisco area. So I signed up and I went, and I was one of, I think I counted maybe four other white people there. Um, and it was a great experience. I ended up going back for 4 consecutive years. It was a great, great experience
Wow.
because it taught me, number one, that there's a tremendous amount of talent in people of color, technology talent in the Bay Area. So when I hear companies say, "Oh, we'd hire them, but they're not there," oh, they're here. Come to this conference. Set up your recruiting table here. There are so many talented people. It also there were a handful of people who would look at me like, what is she doing here? Like I'm not the norm in that group. But for the most part, people were incredibly welcoming and just really wonderful. And I got to just experience um, what it feels like to be the outsider. So, what people of color go through every day, that I've never had that experience. So, my willingness to put myself into it, yeah, it was a little uncomfortable, and I'm so glad I did it because I learned so much, and it gave me so much more empathy and appreciation for what other people experience every day. Similarly, I also did not score well, and there was a lot going on with terror in Islam, and this was a few years back, and it was in the news all the time, and I could definitely feel that bias within myself. So I decided to drive to the Islamic Cultural Center in Oakland, California, which is like across the bridge from where I live, and I didn't tell anyone I was going there. Um, and I had two conversations going in my head the whole time. One was, you don't have to do this. You could turn around and go back and no one would know. And the other was, you need to do this. So I went and I met with the most lovely people and I learned about music and food and culture of a community that I really knew nothing about. So, it's
Yeah.
that, are you willing to, put yourself in a place where it's uncomfortable. And I was worried, the same thing people worry about all the time. Will I say the wrong thing? I don't want to insult anybody. But I can do that. Anybody can do that. So,
Yeah.
it's really
With
about
anyone, with people who look like
anyone,
you
right?
too. They can do that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, are we willing to walk the talk? Are we really willing to put some actions behind our desire to see society change and to have people have greater unity and greater equality and respect for one another? And in the business world, unconscious biases affect hiring decisions, they affect promotion decisions, they affect pay equity. It's entrenched. But again, I'm hopeful. There's something called the CEO pledge that a gentleman at the head of Pricewaterhouse Coopers, I think, set up. And he basically went out and he said, if you're really committed to this, then sign this pledge. This pledge that says you're going to take these following actions within your company. And then, a year or so out, you're going to publish the results. And I thought, wow,
Nice.
there's upwards of 500 people who've signed that now. This is great. So movement in the right direction.
Yeah, that's amazing. And a lot of your work, and I think a great application of this whole topic, understanding others, understanding the role that implicit bias plays in the way that we view them. Why is this really beneficial for companies? You touched on it just a little bit, but there are lots of companies that have done this well and companies that have done it not so well. But why is this touchy-feely subject also a really, really good business proposition as well?
Well, the business case has been validated time and time again. I mean, your return on equity improves. Significant number of your financial measures improve. Your overall happiness of your workforce improves. So there's a really strong business case. And for companies that are uncertain, I typically start there. Look at the studies McKinsey has done. Look at the studies that Catalyst has done. They are strong, they are profound. There's not, small sample size, there are huge sample sizes. So, and it gets back to what we said earlier, just that it makes sense that, when you bring together people with different experiences, different viewpoints, different educational paths, different lives, then you're going to get greater innovation than when you have a big homogeneous group. The
Yeah,
Apple
absolutely.
Watch is a kind of good example. When the Apple Watch first came out, it didn't work on people who had dark skin or tattoos. There was an issue with the design of it where it had to do with pigments. And, they tested the Apple Watch on their board, which is all white people. So, it was a big public relations that could have been avoided had they had a more diverse team actually working on this, or at least participating in the testing of the product.
Yeah, absolutely. I could talk about this topic forever with you because I think it is so incredibly fascinating. But I do just have one last question. And that is, if someone is listening to this and they're saying, I want to do this work and I want the people that I work with to be inspired to do it as well, how would you encourage them? What questions should they ask themselves, or what should they do in their work community to start getting this conversation going?
First, I'd say challenge yourself in identifying your own values as the norm, because we do tend to automatically think, well, these are the things I value. I have learned this through my life experience. This is the right way. But in fact, there can be multiple right ways. So the values that are, the norm for you may not be the norm for somebody else. So be willing to kind of question that. The other is take the test or take a few tests. Really explore for yourself where you stand. You don't have to share the results with anybody, and it's not a pass fail, but it's a way to just enhance your own awareness. And we know that just by virtue of having heightened your own awareness, you begin to mitigate some of the biases that you have. So you can discover a bias and then intentionally work on overcoming that. Go take the test again 6 months down the road and find that your score has improved. You're less biased, or you've maybe eliminated it. So there are lots of things that people can do, for themselves that will benefit the self, but also benefit everyone else too collectively.
Mhm. Absolutely. Such great advice. And yeah, I think one thing that I've learned in my own life, and I've learned from others that I've looked up to and admired, or people who've served as mentors, is that when you have a good example, when you have someone modeling that kind of behavior around you, whether it's in your family or your friend group or in your office, then other people start to come on board as well. So
Mhm.
it's a good thing to do for yourself, but also then you can be a good role model for others.
Exactly.
Barbara, it was such a delight to have you on the show. Thank you for your wisdom and expertise and sharing with us. We really appreciate your time. And again, the book is Women, Minorities, and Other Extraordinary People. And you can read the abstract on getAbstract.com, or you can buy the book. The whole thing is excellent. I really encourage you to do that good reading. Thank you, Dr. Adams.
Thank you for having me and for helping to spread the word about this important work.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank all of you so much for watching this episode of Understanding People. Next up in our series, a couple weeks, we'll tackle another angle of interpersonal communication and how we can understand each other better. Very important in these times. So we hope you'll stay tuned. Check out Get Abstract across all of our social feeds for these upcoming episodes. We look forward to having you join us next time. Have a wonderful day wherever you are. We'll see you soon. Bye.